Okay, the next item is item number 2, application for a certificate of appropriateness at 20 Old Fulton Street in the Fulton Ferry Historic District, docket number 15-7102, block 201, lot 5, a vacant lot with a masonry wall, and this is an application to construct a new building.
Preservation staff. This application is for 20 Old Fulton Street. It's located in the Fulton Ferry Historic District. It's a corner lot bounded by Elizabeth Place and Everett Street, seen right here. The application before you today is to construct a one-story building at the site. Currently, the site is empty with a tall concrete wall at the perimeter, and it's been that way since the time of designation in 1977. And the owner here is here to present, as well as preservation consultant and the architect. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Tobias Lee. I'm a co-owner, I'm not the owner. I'm in the project with 2 other New Yorkers, Richard Mauro, who's here today and has lived in Dumbo for the past 46 years. Some people say he's the longest resident of Dumbo. I'm sure other people would claim the same, but it's been a long time. I just want to take 2 minutes, maximum 3 minutes, go through the history because it's so challenging. Old Fulton Street is so challenging as an environment. It's evolving very quickly. Then Mary Giericks, our historical consultant, will talk for 2 minutes, and then Mark Andre from Snowhead Oak will talk for 5 minutes.
That's fine.
So first of all, thank you for taking the time to hear us. It's been a long road to get to this building because it's a very difficult site, and Landmark staff pointed that out to us very early in the process. It has 3 streets surrounding it, which makes it very difficult. It has an amazing historical context. And obviously, there's basically no buildings in the past 125 years within about 50 yards of the site. So it's potentially has this huge impact on the neighborhood as a new building, and we were very intimidated by how to make it appropriate for the neighborhood. Therefore, the choice of architect became extremely important. By chance, well, we knew we wanted a local architect. That was the goal, because if you haven't walked those streets repeatedly over time, you can't see how the neighborhood's evolving. It was a very complex environment. By chance, the owner of Snowhead lived 2 blocks away from the site, had lived there for a number of years, had been studying how the pedestrian patterns were evolving. So we worked with him. 2 years ago, we started studying the typography of what Old Fulton Street had looked like. We went so far as to look all the way from the founding of Brooklyn to today. My partner, Richard Mauro, has written a history of the neighborhood. We brought copies of it. And we found that the market typography was what the neighborhood was founded on. It was the main retail thoroughfare of New York City. There were millions of people passing it per day, even though we were at an empty lot. That was the history of it. One day the bridge opens, it dies, and it's dead for the next 125 years. Not dead, and now today we have 50,000 people passing the site every day, and we have very limited retail opportunities. So we wanted to fill that gap. We wanted to play off of, you see at the end there, the Fulton Ferry Terminal. We wanted to play on that market architecture with awnings, with storefronts, with all of these things. We spent a year after that debating materials. Materials was the key issue. Obviously, it's surrounded by masonry buildings. How do we compete, or at least not look horrible, in front of these amazing storefronts and in front of the Dumbo neighborhood and Brooklyn Heights neighborhood? We came up with the first designs, which you'll hear about shortly, or you have in front of you. We went around the neighborhood, we canvassed, we presented those designs to 125 people in the neighborhood. They each signed a petition supporting the designs. They liked it. Obviously, everybody wants business, more business coming to the neighborhood. The last thing I'll say we did was we knew we wanted to get value-added tenants. By luck, Richard had run a fundraiser for the tsunami in Japan, and Itoen, which is Japan's largest tea manufacturer, agreed to open their pilot tea shop globally, actually, in the building. So we have it, right now we have signed up a tea shop and a cafe in the building. That's all I'll say. This was a very long process. We were in a lot of discussions with your staff about how to make the materials very strong and how to play on this, but I'll turn it over to Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Mary Diericks, the Historic Preservation Consultant for the project. As Tobias mentioned, Marc-Andre Plas of Snøhetta is here, and he will follow me talking about the design. And Attorney Jed Marcus is here to answer questions if they arise. Going back to the first. 20 Old Fulton is a vacant lot in the Fulton Ferry Historic District, which is adjacent, as you know, to Brooklyn Heights and to the Dumbo districts. Here's the site. Here are views on Everett and Elizabeth Street. Originally, there were 3 low-scale masonry buildings on the block that fronted Old Fulton in the 19th century, and they slowly disappeared by the mid-20th century. By 1947, by 1947 they were gone. They were probably gone by, say, the 1930s. Here's what it looked like in the 19th century. The Old Fulton buildings, I think, are on the left in the middle of the top photo. They're low-scale masonry buildings. This was a very vibrant neighborhood. It's very different today. And the idea is to bring that vibrancy back to the neighborhood. This is, in 1925, there's one building left. It was 3.5 stories. By 1949, that was gone. This building, the commercial building, is still there. The proposed building, which, as you can see, because you have handouts, is a 1-story sloped-roof metal and glass market building with metal awnings. It harkens back to the market and ferry buildings that were so important in New York City in the 19th century. These are iterations of the Fulton Ferry building, all with wide open ground floors, and the latest one with metal cladding. These are more typical 19th century market buildings, wide open floors. Awnings were a major presence in the district and were used extensively in the 19th century and are still used today, both canvas and metal. This particular district has a variety of building heights, from 1 to about 8 stories, and empty lots. There's a lot of glassy ground floors. The top one, it's actually not, it's 25 Old Fulton, is a cast iron building in the district with very big ground floor openings. And the next one is from the 1830s with as big a ground floor openings as they could get. We're working with granite. Sloped roofs were a major feature. There was a sloped roof building on the site, and there are sloped roof buildings in the district today. I'm going to turn this over to Marc-Andre Plas, who's going to talk about the design.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Which button is it?
That one? And point that way.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Marc-Andre Plas. I worked at Snøhetta, and I worked very closely with Craig Dacker to design this building. Craig would have loved to be with us today, but he received a 2-month fellowship at the American Academy in Rome. So poor him, he's in Rome right now, but I'm sure he's enjoying himself. So we started the project really at studying its location in the neighborhood and also its connection to the historical district. Here you can see a current view inside the site. So it's completely disused, it's cut off from the community, and also it creates a huge disruption when you walk down Fulton Street with the big concrete wall. And we really want to infuse it with a new life and a more active participation in the district life. As I said, we really studied the history of the site. One of the photos that struck us is this one, where you can see the importance of steel structures in the neighborhood with the old ferry terminal and the Brooklyn Bridge under construction. And this really inspired us. We started to study various examples of steel structures that were very often associated with market use. That's another one that has been converted. And also even on the old Fulton Street, we used to have the elevated train running along that has been dismantled. But it was part of the history of the site. Also here you can see generally the type of life we want to give for the ground floor of our building. Some nice shots that would really participate to the community and the district. Another thing that really struck us on the site was the use of awnings along Old Fulton Street. So it has been used very much in the past, and we wanted to bring it back in our own building. Another thing that we liked also is that there's a very typical color scheme that we can see in the area, which is a very dark commercial base with a very warm tone masonry on top, which you can see down there, which is brought back into our own building. So what you have is on the first floor, you have a very open and glass steel structure painted in a dark color, black. And on top of it, you have a series of awning made of corten steel that would be a warm tone color.
Are the colors more accurate on our materials than
Which
on the screen?
which are more orange than yellow.
Sorry, yes, yeah.
Okay.
It's very awkward there, but, well, it's corten steel, so it would be orange. This is a view from the corner of Everett and Old Fulton Street. There you see how the ground floor is really open onto the street. So the building read as a very delicate steel structure on the ground floor that wants to be as open as possible to the street. You also see on top of it a row of awning that will really help to protect and animate the facade. So the building is generally unassuming. We're not trying to overpower the buildings around us, and we're rather trying to really have a delicate integration in the surroundings. Also, you can see a close-up at the corner. We have higher transom there because we want to open better views on the Brooklyn Bridge from the corner of the building. And this is a view down Old Fulton Street. Today what you have is a plain concrete wall, and it really creates a disruption for the pedestrian that walk down the street. So for us, it's really important, again, to open up the building as much as possible to the street. And here you see from a little bit further back. So this is the view of the plan. We were planning to have 3 very small shops that open directly onto Old Fulton Street. Each of them have their own separate entrance. Each entrance is set back about 18 inches from the street to mark each entrance. And we occupy the full area of the site. And at the back you have a more functional band that regroups the stair and bathrooms. This is quickly a view of the cellar. And this is the rooftop view. So as you can see, we really regrouped all the mechanical equipment as far away as possible from the neighbors. And this is a view of the elevations. I'll go quickly through the front elevation on Fulton Street. So as we mentioned earlier, you have black painted steel on the ground floor, and it's mounted by the corten steel awnings. We carefully subdivided the fenestration to bring it more in line with the proportion found in the district. Also, all the windows and door will be made of cold rolled steel windows, which is a very traditional way of building windows, and it's a very beautiful material. And also the central part of each, in each bay will open outward like French doors, so each storefront will have a possible connection with the sidewalk. On the side elevation, you can see that we have a sloped parapet, which is reminiscent of the building that used to be on the site that had slanted roofs. And also once we come at the back of the site toward the neighboring concrete wall, we switch our own material to concrete, smooth concrete. So it's going to help to make the transition from the steel building to the neighbor's building, and it really helps also to showcase better the steel architecture. This is a typical section through the building. So the dotted line represents the buildable line, and as you can see, we don't go over that buildable line, either for the architecture or the mechanical equipment. And these are detailed section through the awnings. So the awnings, it's formed by a corten steel sheet, and it's supported by a painted a frame, a steel frame painted in black. And also we integrated some lighting device that will light the corten steel plate from the back, and the light will reflect on the sidewalk. And this is a detail of the entrance. So we're planning also to use like a thick 1/4 inch thick steel plates to assemble the columns, so it won't look flimsy. It's really going to look like a thick steel building, and it's going to have. We're trying to really express each material for what it is, and it's not. It's trying to be as true to itself as possible. It's something we bring throughout the building. And this ends our presentation.
Yeah, I just have a few questions. One is more sort of a clarification, but I think perhaps you've already answered it. The sloped roof is being driven by two things, right? One is that that's how much you can build to as per an easement, but I think you talked a little bit about it reflecting the existing sloped roof, and is that the 4-story building that used to occupy the site?
If I'm correct, Mary, there used to be a building right on the site that had slopes.
Okay. But your inspiration otherwise of the 1-story building is really coming, it's not really coming from that building
No,
that
it's-
occupied on the site, but on other smaller 1-story buildings in the neighborhood.
When the neighboring building behind was owned by the same owner, she signed an easement with herself limiting the height.
Right, I understand that, but I'm just talking about the slope of
Yeah,
that.
and the easement actually states so.
Right. Okay, and the second thing is, because it seems like a very significant part of your design element is the canopies themselves and the fact that they're not, it's not uniform. Are these retractable? Is it intended?
We would like to have them pivot down and up, yeah.
So down and up, but I'm talking about the varying lengths. So is there a situation where all the awnings will be pulled up and you won't have any of this? Or-
Right now, they're all pulled up in this, we purposefully made them different lengths, so
Okay.
that it animates the facade. When we were making them all the same length, it didn't look as good.
Right, but I guess my question is that you've made them these varying lengths, but those are fixed in place, or they will change over time? They're there.
They will rotate up and down.
Okay, it's just, they rotate up and down,
In
They're
section
but they
of
do
the
not change in length,
No.
so they don't shorten and
No.
lengthen. Okay, that was the question I had. Yes, Roberta?
So, but you don't really see, at least in the rendering, any supports. I mean, you show it on your, you had a little detail where you showed it. So what does that, yeah, so you don't see any of those, but none of those were ever, yeah, something would be visible sometime, I think.
What visible?
Those, the.
Supports are not visible in the rendering.
It's part of the expression. Yeah, we would have small braces every 10 feet.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you don't, I mean, I think.
It's, there's a Swiss manufacturer who, it's basically a gearbox that turns this going up and down, thereby pushing it out.
So that extends.
This actually moves up and down, so it comes.
Oh, so they move in, but that connector piece stays stiff.
It was an attempt to animate the
You move
marketplace,
that,
and, yeah, exactly.
I have a question about the Core 10, which I like a lot, but Core 10, I think, still drips, right? All
You
over the
can
sidewalk.
retreat it to have it pre-rusted,
It
so
will end up being
it's
kind of-
like the Barclay Center, that's what they did. It really limits the amount of rust that falls on the sidewalk.
The sidewalk at the perimeter of the Barclay is brown.
A bit, yeah.
Are there any more questions right now for the applicant? Okay, we may call you back. Yes.
I don't know that it's really fully understood. When you stand under the awning, you will see the support.
No, I was
Yeah.
just saying, I thought something was maybe missing in the rendering, because it just sort of looked like it was suspended by.
It's more like an art
Something, that's all.
presentation, you know.
Yeah.
It's not this.
All right, we'll take public testimony. Barbara Zay?
Maybe only that one on this aspect. Doesn't matter.
Barbara Zay of the Historic Districts Council. HDC is not entirely sure that this rather temporary-looking structure is appropriate to its context in which powerful masonry buildings are dominant. However, the building seems to emulate the look of market stalls, which, as the applicant pointed out, could work in this district. Our committee feels that in the spirit of market buildings, perhaps corrugated metal or fabric awnings might be more appropriate than the proposed perforated Corten steel panels, which are known to drip rust onto the sidewalk. While our committee was glad that the applicant is not proposing glass awnings, it would prefer to see more articulation for this prominent feature on the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew Stewart? Each person will be given 3 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matt Stewart. I'm a resident of the Fulton Ferry Historic District. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the history of the district. In 1977, when this was first designated, there were already 6 historic districts in Brooklyn at that time, beginning with the Brooklyn Heights District, which was designated in 1965, going up through Park Slope, Carroll Gardens, Thornhill, Cobble Hill, and the size of those districts went from Brooklyn Heights, which was over 1,200 buildings, to Carroll Gardens, which was 160 buildings. So when the Fulton Ferry Landing was designated with only 22 buildings in it, it was really quite unique. And although subsequent designations have occurred with smaller areas, those tend to be like Agate and Albemarle Court, or other terraces, which were developed all at the same time, basically by the same developer. And none of them have the kind of range that the Fulton Ferry District has. Now, I ask that you look at the Fulton Ferry District, just so you know, the area we're talking about is down here in the lower portion, and this district is bisected by the Brooklyn Bridge, thus effectively cutting off the northern portion of the district. So this is really the heart of the district. Now, when it was designated, it was noted that there were encouraging signs of growth in the area, in particular the conversion of the old Brooklyn City Railroad Company by David Morton. And it was David Morton who was responsible for developing 7 Everett Street and the neighboring lot of 20 Old Fulton Street. They were developed together. And they had a similar or a same treatment of the outside. Now, and they existed essentially in harmony until the lot, which had been owned separately, was sold when the original investor moved out of that building. Now, you've heard about the easement. However, the current the current condition of that lot is a function of the current owner's treatment of that lot. When, after that separation, that lot was painted a different color. The discarded property which you saw inside that lot, which looks unsightly, is the property of the current owner. This is, to the extent that this is being offered as a solution to a current eyesore, it's an eyesore of the current owner's own making. Now, the current proposal does not seek to be appropriate.
I'm sorry, your time is up. If you can just, if you can quickly just wrap
Well, the materials are not appropriate. This discussion of the sight lines from Eagle Warehouse down to the Brooklyn Railroad, it's not true. There's a perfect sight line down there, which is interrupted by these awnings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It's just that the historical precedents that are cited by the applicant are a crazy quilt of decontextualized and...
Thank you, sir. Your time is up. Thank you. Catherine Adams.
A lot of the history of this area, and I'm afraid I will start with it. I'm Sorry.
Yes.
Good morning. I will have to kind of dive into the history one more time. I am Katrin Adam, a practicing architect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who has lived on Old Fulton Street for 42 years. I am speaking as board member of the Fulton Ferry Landing Association. All these years, our neighborhood association has been involved in fostering development and improvements in our neighborhood and that assured that the historic character and fabric are preserved. Fulton Ferry, a very small historic district, received its landmark designation due to the presence of a series of extraordinary buildings that reflect the development and history of this small neighborhood over the last 175 years. Old Fulton Street is the heart of the historic district. Its row of early and mid-19th century buildings on the north side survived because the overriding Brooklyn Bridge restricts any large-scale development, whereas the unrestricted land at the street's south side made way for large, impressive buildings that catered to the industrial and commercial needs of the waterfront and Brooklyn at large. The volumetric readings of these structures is clearly visible and needs to be acknowledged in the proposed building design. We understand designing a new small building in the immediate presence of three prominent masonry buildings, the Eagle Warehouse, the Watchtower buildings, and the former horse stable building at 7 Everett Street, is a challenge, and we regret that this challenge has not been successfully met. The existing architectural vocabulary should be respected. We suggest that a masonry or concrete building material be used, which would not necessarily preclude the steel fenestration. The proposed building looks too temporary, the steel construction too insubstantial and inappropriate. The new building's facades will not only face Old Fulton Street, but also Elizabeth Place and Everett Street, and they abut the existing building facade of 7 Everett Street. These existing facades should be shown on the drawings to enable one to evaluate the contextual relationship between the existing and new proposed facade design. We also question the concrete steel awnings. The reference to historical covered walkways once found on neighborhood buildings appears forced and seem to act more like shields to hide the mechanical equipment and roof railings. And then water runoffs from the Cortina steel certainly would stay in the concrete. We have heard about this. But they're also a temptation for a surface to receive signature.
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay, can I summarize? I summarize, we consider the proposed design incompatible with the architectural vocabulary of the historic district, and we respectfully request that the commissioners do not approve the design as presented today. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Stageberg?
Good morning. My name is Jane Stoggeberg. I'm a registered architect, and I've resided at 7 Everett Street to the immediate south of 20 Old Fulton Street for over 20 years. I'd like to make a few comments regarding the proposed architecture and its impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And to assist these comments, I've made a handout that if you could take a look at, I'd appreciate. The first image shows 20 Old Fulton Street and 7 Everett Street immediately to its south at the time that the historic stable building at 7 Everett Street was developed as a residence in 1979 with the two properties under one ownership. The garden walls surrounding the site at 20 Old Fulton completed the block, had a direct relationship to 7 Everett Street's garden walls, and together the two properties formed a comprehensive whole. I believe the current proposal would benefit from developing a stronger connection to the neighboring garden walls. There's an abrupt material and color shift from the earth-toned masonry to the black steel facade that defies any kind of connection. In terms of form, the wedge-shaped elevations along Everett Street and Elizabeth Place are out of character with the immediate context and the historic district at large. The large awnings, which seem unresolved by ending abruptly at either end, could wrap the corner of Everett Street if they were placed lower on the facade, which would be more in keeping with historic market structures. This would give more prominence to the building at the corner of 7 Everett and Old Fulton, especially when viewed from Pier 1 Park and Fulton Ferry Landing. Lastly, the awnings, due to their size, would would require the removal of 3 mature trees planted along Old Fulton Street. And these trees are shown on the second page of the handout. This would be a significant loss to the neighborhood, as there are a limited number of trees along the south side of this street. The proposal should be amended to preserve and/or replace the trees as deemed appropriate by the city. Thank you for the opportunity to make these remarks.
Thank you. Timothy Bade?
Good morning. My name is Timothy Bade, and I'm a resident of 7 Everett Street for over 20 years. As we've heard, the site of this proposed project is very prominent in the neighborhood, and I feel it's important for landmarks to fully understand the proposal, yet the drawings that have been presented are misleading and do not tell a complete story. First, while I appreciate that the proposal appears to take into account the restrictive easement, the drawings include misleading dimensions. If you compare the wall heights shown in the proposal to the actual wall heights shown on a 2014 survey of the property, you can see that the proposed walls start almost a foot higher than the existing walls they are intended to spring from. Secondly, the plans call out a restaurant and cafe space at the ground floor, yet no kitchen mechanical equipment or exhaust vents are shown on the roof plan. As the proposal is for a 1-story building and rooftop equipment is potentially visible from the street, this is an important issue to consider. Also, given that the property is only 1 story tall, how the exhaust is handled will have a direct visual and noise impact on Old Fulton Street. Thirdly, the drawings imply that the roof is to be made accessible, as they show a guardrail and concrete pavers, which are otherwise not necessary. Rooftop use would require stair bulkheads, which are out of character for a building this size in this neighborhood. If in fact the owner is intending to apply for rooftop use, we request that any amendments to the project go back to landmarks and remain open for public review. I respectfully request that the present proposal is not approved until these issues are adequately addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Vivian Krieger?
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Vivian Krieger, Posen O'Connor, representing Severett Everett Corporation, the co-op for the adjacent property to the south of the applicant. As you've heard, we have a number of concerns regarding this application. The applicant had previously submitted plans to the Commission showing 3 proposed bulkheads which would violate a recorded easement for light air and view over 20 Old Fulton Street. However, in the face of opposition to the plans based on the easement, we were advised by applicant's counsel that they had revised their plans last week to remove the bulkheads, but with the express intention of amending the plans after the new design was approved to provide for the bulkheads. These bulkheads, for 2 staircases and an elevator, would allow commercial use of the roof. While the Commission does not regulate use, it can, and we believe would, find that such bulkheads are not characteristic of the historic district, because while there are a number of 1-story commercial buildings in the historic district, none have bulkheads, including 2 directly across the street from the cited issue. Therefore, an amendment of the plans post-LPC approval is of such significance that we request that any report from LPC explicitly state that any proposal to include any additional obstruction on the roof, permitted or otherwise, that is visible from the street should require additional public review, including community board consideration and another public hearing before the Commission. Further, if the applicant submits such plans during the current review process, we request that the record either remain open or be reopened to allow for further public review and comment. While the Commission cannot act on a design that is not before you, given the applicant's original design and stated intention, we ask the Commission to guard against any attempt to circumvent public review. Similarly, given what we anticipate to be a significant number of aspects of the plan that is before you to be revised, we request that the public record not be closed, at least for written comment, until after the submission of any revisions resulting from your comments today. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Matt Ojala?
Hi, my name is Matt Ojala. I'm here on behalf of Councilmember Stephen Levin, who represents 20 Old Fulton Street. I'm going to read his testimony. I'm here to testify in opposition to the proposed design for the 20 Old Fulton Street project. Many of the constituents I represent will speak today, and I echo their desire for a more appropriate design developed in consultation with the building's future neighbors. My opposition springs from two concerns. First, that the building design looks out of character with the historic structures surrounding the site, and second, that the community does not feel that their input has been heard or heeded during this process. It is important that developers respect the Fulton Ferry Historical District's rich history by ensuring that new construction does not substantially differ from the architectural character of the area. This district is an important part of the heritage of Brooklyn and New York City as a whole. Its roots stretch back to a time when Brooklyn was a city of its own and Manhattan could only be reached by steamboat. While the design does acknowledge some precedents, such as 19th century awnings, I'm not satisfied that these details bring the overall design into context with the neighborhood. Respect for the architectural context should be a core design element for any new project in a historic district, not an afterthought or an expedient. I'm also troubled by the lack of engagement with the community around a design that will change the face of their block and neighborhood. Engaging in a good faith dialogue with the community is a key part of being a good neighbor and fostering positive relationships with people who live in the area. It speaks volumes that so many active members of the community have taken the time to appear here today and voice their concerns about the design to the commission. Clearly, the community is not satisfied with this design or the process by which it was conceived. For these reasons, I urge the commission to ask for a more appropriate design for the proposed building at 20 Old Fulton Street. To be clear, I am not opposed to construction at the site. Rather, I believe that any new development, especially in a historic district, must reflect the architectural character of the neighborhood and be respectful of community input. In this case, I feel that it would be appropriate for the developers to go back to the drawing board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Are there any more speakers? Right, we received Community Board 2's recommendation. The Land Use Committee supported the project. However, they do note that there was, while a majority supported the project, there was some opposition on the committee. All right, yes. Would you like to respond to some of the issues that were raised?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Just a few corrections. It was noted that mechanical equipment was hidden. That's true. We did want to hide it. I think it's better than seeing it from the street.
Have you shown the mechanical equipment
Yes,
on your, okay, you have, and
It's not hidden, you can see it, but you have to get under the awning to see it.
okay, so it's in that sloped area, is that correct?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, there's no wall here, this is open.
But there would be a grill that from the street, the light passes, but visually you can't see it.
We didn't want to, I think we didn't want to put it in a place that was visible from the street.
But you allocated space for restaurant-grade equipment as well as regular exterior?
No, actually, that's another correction. The tenants who are signed up, which is for 80% of the space right now, is a tea shop and a cafe. There is no restaurant equipment, actually. So that was the other correction. The problem, this falls within the new FEMA flood zone, so putting the equipment in the basement is a flood risk. So that's why we've had to put it on the roof. We tried to hide it as much as possible. We also tried to pull it back from the neighbors as much as possible. To the trees issue, which you don't see here because it's the final design, that's actually a parks issue because the trees are 16 inches from the wall, so obviously digging down, the trees will die. If we preserve those trees, fundamentally, it's an unbuildable site.
Can you relocate them to
No,
to the curb?
There's a gas line, but we can relocate Obviously, we pay for parks to plant the equivalent width of tree, most likely in the park.
But just along this stretch where your building is there any place to plant trees?
Unfortunately, this is gas line
Okay.
going here, and that has a minimum width. And this is too narrow. And on this corner, there actually is a tree. You can see there.
But we tried to place them just a little bit up front, and we were informed that we could not because there's too many services passing under the sidewalk.
Yeah. Can I bring up a little bit first?
Yes.
We do dispute the survey comments that were made. We have a registered survey, which we can share with the commission. We are not, I stress, we are not applying for roof usage. We would have liked to use the roof. I think most of the people who spoke are using their roof right up here, but out of respect for them, we are not applying for that. The guardrails and the pavers are for access to the mechanical equipment. Without those, there's no access, there's no solid surface to put the mechanical equipment on. And I also would like to respectfully disagree with Councilman Levin's speaker. Actually, the neighborhood we did receive a petition with 125 people to whom we submitted the specific designs. And that's from the North Heights to the Navy Yard. It includes the 4 historic districts that surround us. And they're not just residents, they're the owners of the businesses on Old Fulton Street, who obviously want to provide more services. So there is very strong community support for this.
And have you submitted that into the record?
Your record?
Yes.
Yes. Did we? Yeah, we did. And that's to the specific designs. That's not to the principle of a building. That's to these actual designs. And that's everyone from the owner of Grimaldi's to the owner of the River Cafe to the direct people across the street. It's been extremely positively. Obviously, I think there's value put on the Japanese tenants. They've hired a very famous Japanese interior designer to do their interiors and to match them. Just one more correction. Well, you might be saying this, but actually, one more correction. There always was a contrast of materials between 7 Everett, which is from where all of the objectors came, and the materials of the building here. It was always brick and concrete, or brick and steel and concrete.
Also, that there were buildings on that site for many, many years while 7 Everett was there. It wasn't built as 7 Everett was not built when this was a vacant lot. And the renderings do show the adjacent buildings. There are a lot of renderings, and you do see the context. And just the last thing is that what is proposed is a modern building that respects and relates to the history and fabric of the historic. And we tried our best there.
Last correction was that it was also stated that it's all masonry. The amazing thing to us about Old Fulton Street was it actually is a mishmash. So Grimaldi's, which was a bank, is a steel building with large windows. There are brick buildings. There's River Cafe, which is effectively a large one-story steel and wood structure. It's always been a mishmash. As you can see, that makes it incredibly difficult to talk to everyone. And lastly, we did attempt to contact the neighbors 3 months ago. It was 2 weeks ago that we heard from them, just for the record.
All right. Are there, yes, questions? Adi?
Was this wall, in fact, a garden wall for some time? Was there a garden back there?
A beer garden there was.
Right. And I'm wondering why that was not the kind of the precedent that you would pick up on, as opposed to a kind of a metal market awning. It seems to me that a garden, a walled garden, as a restaurant or beer garden or something like that, is entirely kind of appropriate on lots of levels. So just wondering why you didn't go that direction.
Yeah, no, this district was designated, the Fulton Ferry District was designated primarily for its historic 19th century buildings and for its important history as the ferry landing. And this walled garden was much later as the district was in decline, and was therefore a less significant period in the history of this district.
And it was shops coming down. Actually, if you look at the historical shot, That's, as Mary said, a later, let me just pull that one up. You can see here, actually it was steel bottom masonry done.
Do we
Yes.
know the age of the wall?
No.
Yeah, no, we do. It was, I believe it's late 70s. It's a late 70s.
So until then it was open?
No, first you had these structures there that you see in this one. Then you had the beer garden.
So it was
AC.
open, go back, oh, yeah.
They're red.
That way.
Yeah, it was a different wall.
And Landmarks
Another
actually mandated that wall in a decision in the late 70s, I believe. It was.
I don't
Yes.
know what's being, the wall was there at the time of designation. It's in the designation photo. It's not called out as anything significant. The beer garden history also is not discussed in the district designation report or in the history of the site. That's something that the owner, through his interest in the site, has discovered. So Landmarks has not identified this site as a significant garden, and that's it. And neither wall is not called out as a significant feature of the site either.
As a part of the designation, understood. Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, Roberta.
The presenter just sort of summarized once again why this building is, in terms of material and size and shape or whatever, contextual and why it should be considered appropriate based on what you presented about the history. Can you just sort of summarize?
You want me to
the
summarize one more
elements?
time?
Yes.
I think it's a function of, my partner Richard bought the site 9 years ago. It's a function of 9 years, literally, of thinking. And as I said, we spoke to many, many architects, and to move with an evolving district that's already a mishmash, and where property values of the neighbors are affected, obviously, by the changing of a lot, you had many, many inputs. And I think the material selection was the starting point, and we tried to play on as many different local materials as we could. The Toll Brothers building on Water Street, which you might remember, which mixes Core 10 with reinforced concrete, we found that successful in many ways. We thought the Core 10 fit nicely. Obviously, this is Fulton Ferry, not Dumbo. The color scheme, which Mark pointed out, also led us down the road of Core 10. And fundamentally, I started with this slide because it's the life. It's tragic what happened to the street. You had millions of people going through it, and literally one day the bridge opens, ferry's over, the street dies, and we want to give it life again. And that's why we tried to get high quality tenants. And when we got high quality tenants, obviously as a Japanese leading retailer, they wanted something special as well. So I think that led us to the material selection. It's a big challenge. That's all I can summarize. It's a very challenging
And
site.
that it harkens back to market buildings. And the Fulton Ferry, the last one, was a metal building with wide, open ground floor spaces.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you. I just want to comment on some of the testimony that we heard today about changes to the design in the future, which may include rooftop access that has not been presented. It's not about the mechanicals, but rooftop access, which may have not been presented today. Those kind of applications would come back to the Landmarks Preservation Commission, depending on the scope of that project. It could be reviewed at staff level if it's minimally visible. However, it is visible, it would likely come back to the commission as well. So just wanted people to understand the process. Whatever we are reviewing right now is the scope of what we may approve or modify, but anything that's outside of the scope would have to come back to the agency. All right, if there are no other questions for the applicant, then we can close the hearing and we can move to discussion. Okay. All right, I think there's several issues here. One is just in terms of the redevelopment of the site itself. And at least in my opinion, I think they've made a fairly compelling reason to redevelop the site, given its limitations and how much they can develop. But in terms of creating a market use that, at least historically, I think really does reflect what the character of Fulton Street was. It was, in fact, some kind of promenade. I find, in fact, the first picture that they've shown here, which is from 1885, that even though it's behind taller buildings, you have what seems like one-story facades that that allow for an activity going down to the river as being part of the historical context. So the idea of proposing a retail use with this kind of commercial nature seems, in my opinion, fairly appropriate. I think the design of this one-story building and where it's calling or deriving its elements from is something that some of it I think I think there's been a reflection of concerns about that, but I think we can debate or come up with changes that we think would help to support its appropriateness. Comments? Yes, Michael?
I guess my fundamental approach to this is to decide whether or not this is something that improves the district or does not improve the district. And absolutely, there needs to be something, I feel there needs to be something on this spot. Again, there are many things that are not within the purview of this commission that have come up. But essentially, the reference for me to the Fulton Ferry building and the metal buildings, I've spent a great deal of time in this seaport area. I came to the city to work in the seaport area, and I'm familiar with the references, I'm familiar with the buildings, and I unfortunately find that this design, while almost contemporary, has enough of those contrived elements like the Core 10 awnings to not meet what I consider to be a level of appropriateness for this district. The Fulton Ferry building is, yes, a metal building, and there's a gusto about the detailing in that building that this one, to me, completely lacks. It looks almost temporary, whereas the Fulton Ferry building is one that is there, certainly not for the ages, but it's built with somewhat of a permanence in mind. And so ultimately, I find this to be neither fish nor fowl, and I agree with you that perhaps a redesign, a discussion with our very able staff could make it so, but I can't approve this one.
Okay. Other comments? Yes. Roberta?
I think I agree with that assessment of it. I think that given the presentation of the other types of buildings that exist there and the history, that it sort of skips, when it goes from those buildings to this building. And I think I agree that yes, there should be something here, and that it could be this one story at this one story maxing. I think that that's possible too. But I think for me, it's more question of looking at the materials and looking back at the history of the district and coming forward with something that evolves from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that the explanation of what it should make reference to, I thought was good, but I just don't think that it actually does yet, and I think it could, and I think it does maybe have to do, if this is I think first of all, looking at the materials is an important thing, because even the question of the awnings, should it be this steel? I think that there are questions about maybe reasons why it shouldn't be,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the concept is okay. I just think it needs to be worked on, and maybe if it's metal, then it's more detailing, more somehow looking at the metal as something that is more permanent and is more special, and that it doesn't appear to be just a taxpayer, just a building.
Right.
It should look more permanent.
I mean, it's an interesting question, which is always about modern interpretations of more sort of, classic features. And I think there are enough options for the applicant to come up with a design over here that is much more in tune with the building elements that you see in some of the earlier pictures. I think when they start abstracting it, it really brings out a very interesting debate for us. Yes, Michael, and then Diana.
I agree with the other commissioners, and I would only add that I think that the photos shown both by the applicant and by some of the people who testified show that yes, there is a very long and storied history both in this district and in the Seaport more broadly of the use of metal as a first floor structure or as the fabric for one-story structures in general. But I think that for me what kind of makes it seem like the taxpayer, like a temporary building that several people have noted, is the both the volumes, the bulk of the various elements of it, the columns, the sidewalls, and how those elements are rendered with a very simple panel system, which I think it kind of defaults to a very inexpensive aluminum type view, even though in fact here it's being made with quite expensive materials. So I think that we've seen lots of examples here at the Commission of contemporary buildings that completely eschew any overt stylistic references to traditional styles or that have lots of detail, lots of depth, lots of scale in the way those facades are made that give them a resonance within a historic district, even though they're not imitative of that style. So I would suggest that the applicant take a look at that. Also, I would say that the concrete bulkhead at the far end of the site, the west end of the site, it's very prominent. And I would say that while I don't think that concrete per se is an inappropriate material for such a striking, important feature, and that concrete's a very, figures largely in many of the buildings that you can see from this site, that they should look at how it's treated, not treated as a default element, but really look at making it part of the design in some way. It seems like it's going to be just like it's kind of a forgotten thing the way it's shown. Lastly, I think that the most controversial element of the project are the awnings, the Corten awnings. I'm kind of okay with having a messy brown sidewalk, but I don't think that's inappropriate. But I think that the big move here is to make them all irregular, right? That's the thing that the applicant said gave it some life. It was too boring if it was straight. But I think that the option to have these things move changes for me the way they relate to the street. And I think that the fact that they're always shown in the renderings as being in one single plane conveys an intent. And I think that intent may or may not be how it looks in real life if they are movable and if people do choose to move them. I'm not sure exactly why they would. But so I think if that's going to be a design element, that it should be shown and we should see what the effect is, and that may change one's view about the irregular length of them. One last thing, please show the grill work or louvers for what will be a visible parapet, because that will be something we will see.
All right, any other comments? Yes, Eddie?
Do you mind just flipping to this image? Yeah, that one. And this is the one that you were referring to. The sort of translation, I think, happens when we say that the new design is reminiscent of storefront that exists in various places. That might be the case, but storefronts have additional floors above them. which means that they are not buildings in and of themselves. The difference is, in this example, is that it acts like a single object, a pavilion. Its roof has dimension, and it stands sort of in a singular form. It's not dependent on the rest of the building as a storefront would be. So there's a mistranslation, and I think that that's in part what doesn't allow for us to read what you've designed as a building, one story or not. The flip side of that, and why I was excited about the possibility of garden wall, is that the garden wall, in a sense, is the opposite of this situation. It is roofless, even if there is some sort of a structure that is perhaps recessed or unseen. The language of a roof of a garden, of a beer garden or some kind of a walled garden, means that the wall is the dominant, and then the possibility for life, green life, and other activity is interesting. So both of those things have a certain type, whereas what you've proposed is neither. Neither the pavilion nor the walled garden, and I think that that's the problem.
Right, except, I'm not committed to the sort of the wall garden, and I think historically that's not really necessarily recognized by the district. But I would say that I think in terms, and I'm just going to go back to what Commissioner Goldblum said, which is about the facade itself and its treatment. I think it's helpful to maybe hone in on some of these buildings historically that have been a part of what you believe you're drawing from, and maybe do more of an analysis of what that is in terms of proportions, what that means in terms of just the voids versus the structure. That may actually be able to give you some idea of how to design this, where it doesn't look so temporary, that it looks more permanent, and where it's actually drawing from the patterns that have been there historically. Just in terms of the awning itself, I don't know this material and the impact of it, but I would again agree that somehow you've shown us a situation which is a moment in time, and maybe we're responding to that. But I think if you really want this to be a more flexible design, then I think we should see what it looks like in different moments. But on the other hand, I'm not even sure whether it's really, I know it gives some level of interest, but it does also kind of distract from some of the elements that are actually very regular. So you have metal awnings before, and they're all very regular, and people can identify with that. So you may want to rethink that as well. Yes, Fred?
One quick comment. First of all, I'll say also that I know the site pretty well. About 6:45 every morning, you can find me rounding the corner after my big walk in the park up back to Brooklyn Heights. So I know the corner very well, and have since well before it was designated in 1977. I have to agree with many of these comments, but to me the issue is the temporariness of the feeling of the building, and I think that's what's wrong. And part of that is led, unfortunately, by the restrictive easement. So you got a real problem. You want to be a 2- or 3-story building kind of here, but you can't. So somehow, I think what Addie said, what Michael has said about making the building more solid, more there, less temporary feeling. And I think it's not the awnings per se that make it feel temporary. I think coming up to the very top of the building seems to make the building float away. And perhaps in your reworking of it, perhaps that can also lead you somewhere. But I think we're going to, I hope, approve a building that is here. I think that's an important thing. By the way, lest anybody thinks this is a dead area that needs these 3 little shops to help make it lively again, please go and visit. I suspect we will be back here approving a much widened sidewalk in the near distant future, because this is an extraordinarily, almost overused piece of our city now because of the success of the park and the other fabulous things that happen on this waterfront. But I think this will help that flow of people. By the way, one last thing from a guy who is also in another hat, the chairman of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. I hate to see the loss of trees, of course, But, you know, trees are not necessarily a key part of the history of this block. We hate to lose trees, but I think that's just a comment. It would be nice to have them placed on the sidewalk again, perhaps. Maybe you can do that, or maybe you can't. I just wanted to get that out there, too, that you certainly can't keep those 3 trees and build a building there.
All right. Okay, so we'll bring you back.
Thank you very much.